Ada stopped in front of the chief, her bare feet firmly planted on the dusty ground. She looked up at him, unflinching. "You have been given every opportunity to prove your worth," the chief said, his tone heavy with disappointment. "Yet you choose idleness over labor, and dreams over duty. This village has no room for laziness, especially now. If you cannot show us your value in 3 days' time, you will be cast out, never to return." A gasp echoed through the square. Exile was the harshest punishment in Ibyub, a fate reserved for thieves and traitors. To be stripped of community and kin was to be condemned to loneliness and despair. Ada's lips curved into a faint smile, a reaction that drew shocked murmurs from the crowd. She tilted her head slightly, as if considering the chief's words like one might ponder the outcome of a chess move. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm and steady. "I understand, Chief," she said. 3 days, you say?" The chief nodded, his stern expression unchanging. "Very well," Ada said. She turned to face the crowd, her voice rising so that all could hear. "Mark my words, people of Ibyub. Before the sun sets on the 3rd day, you will thank me. Not just for my work, but for the lessons you will learn." The villagers erupted into laughter and scoffing, the sound ringing out like a chorus of mocking birds. "Lessons?" one man jeered. "What could a lazy girl possibly teach us?" Ada did not respond. She simply turned and walked away, her posture unbowed, leaving the crowd to stew in their disbelief. As the square emptied and people returned to their tasks, whispers followed Ada like a trail of dust. Some were convinced she was delusional, others thought she was merely buying time before her inevitable disgrace. Yet a few, the quietest among them, saw something in her confidence that unsettled them, a glimmer of purpose, a spark of something they could not quite name. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the village buzzed with speculation. But Ada, the lazy girl who had always been a puzzle, disappeared into the hills, leaving behind a mystery that would soon unravel in ways no one could have foreseen. The village of Ibyub settled back into its usual rhythm after the confrontation in the square, but beneath the surface, a simmering tension lingered. People whispered as they worked, their voices low and conspiratorial, casting glances at Ada's mother, whose face was a mask of quiet pain. The old woman spent her day in restless prayer, beseeching the ancestors to protect her daughter from what seemed like certain doom. Meanwhile, the villagers shared their scorn in the form of stories, each more dramatic than the last, about Ada's supposed laziness. "She once sat by the river all day, watching the water flow," one woman said as she pounded fufu in a rhythmic cadence. "I saw her plucking leaves from a bush last week, like a child with nothing better to do," another chimed in. "She'll be exiled, no doubt. There's no magic in daydreams." But Ada was no longer in the village to hear their words. After her bold declaration in the square, she had walked straight into the hills, carrying nothing but a small woven bag slung over her shoulder. No one had dared to follow her, though many had watched from a distance, wondering where she could be going and what her plan could possibly be. The hills surrounding Ibyub were vast and untamed, filled with tall grasses that whispered secrets to the wind and ancient trees whose roots told stories of centuries past. Ada's footsteps were sure and steady as she navigated the narrow trails that wound through the landscape. She had always preferred this quiet sanctuary to the bustling village, finding solace in the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. For Ada, the hills were not just a retreat, they were a source of inspiration, a place where her mind could wander freely. And while the villagers had mocked her for what they saw as idleness, Ada had spent years observing the world around her, learning its rhythms and its secrets. She reached a clearing by mid-afternoon, where a lone baobab tree stood sentinel against the sky. Its massive trunk was scarred with age, and its roots twisted like the fingers of an ancient giant. Ada knelt beside the tree, running her hands over the dry earth. The ground here was cracked and brittle, a stark reminder of the drought that had plagued the region. Yet as her fingers traced the patterns in the soil, her mind began to weave connections, piecing together a solution that no one in the village could see. She spent the rest of the day exploring the hills, collecting small objects that others might overlook, smooth stones, hollow reeds, and a handful of seeds she found tucked into the crevice of a rock. She studied the flow of the streams that trickled through the valleys, noting where the water pooled and where it disappeared. She climbed to the top of a ridge and gazed out over the village, the rooftops of Ibyub glowing softly in the golden light of dusk. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ada returned to the baobab tree and set about preparing for the night. She built a small fire using dried branches, its warm glow casting flickering shadows across her face. Pulling a bundle of herbs from her bag, she brewed a simple tea, the fragrant steam rising like a prayer to the stars. Ada sipped it slowly, her mind churning with ideas. The next morning, Ada woke with the sun and resumed her work. She moved with quiet determination, her eyes sharp and her movements deliberate. While the villagers might have seen her as lazy, Ada possessed a patience and focus that few could match. She spent hours studying the land, sketching patterns in the dirt with a stick and whispering to herself as if unraveling a complex puzzle. As she worked, her thoughts drifted back to her childhood, to the moments that had shaped her view of the world. She remembered sitting at her father's feet as he told stories of the ancestors, their wisdom woven into parables that taught the value of observation and ingenuity. "The strongest hunter is not always the fastest," he had once said. "Sometimes, it is the one who watches and waits who brings home the prize." Ada smiled at the memory, the warmth of it wrapping around her like a cloak. She missed her father, who had passed when she was still a girl, but his teachings had stayed with her, guiding her in ways she hadn't fully understood until now. By the end of the second day, Ada's plan had begun to take shape. She returned to the clearing by the baobab tree and laid out the objects she had gathered, stones, reeds, and the seeds, along with several handfuls of clay she had dug from the banks of a stream. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like a child's collection of trinkets, but to Ada, each piece was a crucial part of a larger design. As the moon rose high above the hills, Ada began to work in earnest. She shaped the clay into small vessels, using the reeds to create tiny channels that mimicked the flow of water. She arranged the stones in intricate patterns, testing how they directed the movement of the stream she had diverted earlier that day. Her hands moved with a confidence born of years of quiet observation, her mind alight with possibilities. By the time the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Ada stood back to admire her work. It was a humble model, a representation of the system she intended to build, a system that would save the village from the brink of disaster. She smiled, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. The third day had arrived, and with it, the promise of both judgment and opportunity. Ada gathered her belongings and began the journey back to the village, her heart steady and her resolve unshaken. The people of Ibyub might not understand her yet, but by sunset, they would see her in a new light. As she descended the hills, the morning mist clinging to the valleys, a single thought echoed in her mind, a mantra that carried her forward: sometimes, the laziest solutions are the most brilliant. The sun rose slowly over the village of Ibyub on the third day, casting a warm, golden glow over the thatched rooftops and dusty pathways. The usual morning sounds filled the air: roosters crowing, women pounding yams, and the rhythmic clinking of hoes striking the earth. But beneath the surface, there was a current of tension that everyone felt but no one dared to speak aloud. Today was the day Ada, the so-called lazy girl, would either prove her worth or face the harsh sentence of exile. Villagers whispered among themselves as they went about their chores, their eyes constantly darting to the hills where Ada had disappeared 2 days ago. Would she return, or had she fled to avoid humiliation? Opinions were divided. "She won't come back," one man said, leaning on his hoe. "She's probably hiding in the forest, too ashamed to face us." "I don't know," another woman replied thoughtfully. There was something in her eyes that day. She didn't look scared. "Bah," an elder scoffed, shaking his head. "What can a lazy girl teach us? Mark my words, we'll never see her again." By midday, the village square was filled with people, all gathered to witness Ada's fate. The chief sat on a carved wooden stool at the center, his expression as unreadable as ever. His staff of office rested across his lap, a symbol of authority that carried the weight of generations. Beside him stood the council of elders, their faces etched with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The air grew heavy with anticipation as the minutes ticked by. Children squirmed in their mothers' arms, and the murmur of the crowd swelled and ebbed like the tide. Just as a few began to wonder if Ada truly had fled, a figure appeared at the edge of the square. It was Ada. She walked slowly but with purpose, her bare feet kicking up small puffs of dust with each step. Over her shoulder was a large bundle wrapped in cloth, and her face was calm, betraying none of the nervousness the crowd expected. The villagers fell silent as she approached the chief, their eyes fixed on her with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. Ada stopped in front of the chief and placed her bundle on the ground. Straightening up, she looked him directly in the eye, her voice steady as she spoke. "I have returned, as promised," she said. "And I bring with me not just proof of my worth, but a gift for the village." The chief raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "A gift, you say? Then show us, Ada. Let us see what you have done in these 3 days." Ada knelt and carefully unwrapped the bundle, revealing an assortment of objects that immediately drew puzzled murmurs from the crowd. There were clay vessels, hollow reeds, smooth stones, and small bundles of herbs and seeds. To the untrained eye, it all looked like a collection of useless trinkets, and many in the crowd began to whisper mockingly. "Is this a joke?" someone called out. "She wasted 3 days to bring us this rubbish," another sneered. But Ada paid them no mind. She picked up one of the clay vessels and held it up for all to see. "This," she began, her voice ringing out clear and confident, "is the solution to our greatest problem. Our fields are dry because we have relied solely on the rain, but the hills around us hold water that we have overlooked. With these tools, I will show you how to bring that water to our crops." The crowd fell silent, stunned by the boldness of her claim. Even the chief leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued. Ada motioned to a group of young men standing nearby. "I need your help," she said simply. They hesitated for a moment, unsure, but the chief nodded, signaling for them to obey. Together, they carried the objects to the edge of the fields, where Ada began to explain her plan. She had observed the natural slopes of the land and identified a stream in the hills that could be diverted using a simple system of channels. The clay vessels would act as reservoirs to control the flow of water, while the reeds would guide it directly to the crops. The stones, arranged strategically, would prevent erosion and ensure the water spread evenly. As Ada spoke, her hands moved deftly, assembling the pieces of her system with a precision that belied her so-called laziness. The villagers watched in growing awe as her vision took shape before their eyes. By late afternoon, the first channel was complete. Ada stood back and gave a signal to one of the young men, who released a small dam she had constructed upstream. The villagers gasped as a steady stream of water began to flow down the channel, snaking its way toward the parched fields. The water spread across the soil, soaking into the dry earth and glistening in the sunlight. A cheer erupted from the crowd, a sound of pure, unfiltered joy. Mothers clapped their hands, children danced, and even the elders nodded in approval, their skepticism melting away like morning mist. The chief stepped forward, his expression one of solemn pride. He looked at Ada for a long moment before speaking. "You have done what no one else could," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his authority. "You have shown us that true strength lies not in the body, but in the mind. From this day forward, you will no longer be known as Ada the Lazy. You will be remembered as Ada the Wise." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing across the hills. Ada stood tall, her heart swelling with a quiet pride. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, not for what she had failed to do, but for what she had achieved. As the sun set over Ibyub, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, the villagers gathered to celebrate. Food was shared, songs were sung, and laughter filled the air. Ada sat at the center of it all, her mother by her side, her eyes shining with unshed tears of gratitude. The night ended with a final declaration from the chief, who stood before the village with his staff raised high. "Let this day be remembered as a lesson to us all," he said. "Do not judge by appearances, for wisdom and strength can come from the most unexpected places. And let us never forget the girl who saved our village, not with her hands, but with her mind." Ada smiled, her heart at peace. She had proven her worth, not just to the village, but to herself. And in doing so, she had rewritten her story, transforming it from one of scorn and doubt to one of triumph and inspiration. The days following Ada's triumph brought a transformation not just in her life but in the spirit of the entire village of Ibyub. The irrigation system she had designed became the talk of the region, drawing visitors from neighboring villages who came to marvel at the ingenuity of the lazy girl turned savior. Early each morning, Ada would rise before the sun, her once dismissed routines now met with admiration and curiosity. Villagers who had once mocked her quiet ways now sought her advice, eager to learn what secrets she might unlock next. Her days were filled with purpose, her mind a constant whirl of ideas and observations as she worked tirelessly to improve the irrigation system and teach others how to replicate it. But as the villagers celebrated their newfound prosperity, whispers began to surface of an even greater threat looming on the horizon. The drought that had gripped the land showed no signs of relenting, and while the irrigation system had brought temporary relief, it was clear that the fields would need more than water to thrive. Crops that once flourished under the sun now withered in the relentless heat, their leaves curling and their roots struggling to hold on to life. Ada, too, noticed the signs. One evening, as she walked along the edge of the fields, her fingers brushing against the brittle stalks of maize, a deep unease settled in her chest. The irrigation system had bought them time, but it was not enough. If they did not act quickly, the village's hard-won progress would be lost, and the specter of famine would return with a vengeance. She spent the night poring over her sketches and notes, her mind racing as she considered the possibilities. The village needed not just water but resilience, crops that could withstand the harsh conditions, soil that could retain moisture, and a way to ensure that the land could recover even as the drought persisted. The next morning, Ada called a meeting in the village square. The people gathered quickly, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. By now, they had learned to trust her instincts, even if they did not always understand them. "I have seen the signs," Ada began, her voice steady but urgent. "The drought will not end soon, and the land is suffering. If we do not act now, everything we have worked for will be lost. But I believe there is a way forward." The crowd listened intently as Ada outlined her plan. She proposed a radical shift in the way the village farmed, introducing techniques she had observed in nature and learned from her father's stories. She spoke of crop rotation to preserve the soil, of planting drought-resistant seeds she had found in the hills, and of using organic matter to enrich the land. Her ideas were met with mixed reactions. Some villagers nodded in agreement, their trust in Ada unwavering. Others hesitated, their fear of change outweighing their hope for progress. "Why should we risk everything on methods we do not know?" one elder asked, his tone skeptical but not unkind. "Because we risk even more if we do nothing," Ada replied firmly. "The land is speaking to us, telling us what it needs. We must listen, or we will lose everything." The chief, who had become one of Ada's staunchest supporters, stood and addressed the crowd. "Ada has proven her wisdom before," he said. "Let us give her our trust once more. If we work together, we can face whatever challenges lie ahead." With the chief's endorsement, the villagers reluctantly agreed to follow Ada's plan. Over the next few weeks, the village became a hive of activity. Men and women worked side by side, clearing fields, planting new seeds, and constructing compost pits. Ada led by example, her hands as dirty and calloused as anyone else's, her energy seemingly boundless. But the work was not without its challenges. The elders, set in their ways, often resisted her ideas, questioning her every decision. The younger villagers, while eager to learn, sometimes grew frustrated by the slow progress. And the drought, relentless and unforgiving, tested their resolve at every turn. One particularly difficult day, as the sun blazed mercilessly overhead, Ada found herself alone in the fields, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She knelt in the dry soil, her fingers digging into the earth as tears welled in her eyes. For a brief moment, doubt crept into her heart. What if she was wrong? What if her efforts were in vain? But as she sat there, her hands covered in dirt, a memory came to her, her father's voice, calm and steady, telling her a story about a tiny bird that had tried to put out a forest fire by carrying water in its beak. When the other animals laughed at the bird, it simply replied, "I am doing what I can." The memory filled her with renewed determination. Wiping her tears, Ada stood and returned to her work, her resolve stronger than ever. Slowly but surely, the village began to see the fruits of their labor. The drought-resistant crops sprouted green and sturdy, their roots digging deep into the soil. The compost enriched the land, turning the once barren fields into fertile ground. And the irrigation system, now expanded and improved, ensured that every drop of water was used efficiently. By the time the harvest season arrived, the village was transformed. The granaries, once empty, were filled to bursting with maize, millet, and cassava. The people of Ibyub, who had faced the brink of despair, now stood as a testament to the power of resilience and innovation. At the center of it all was Ada, no longer seen as a lazy girl but as a leader, a visionary, and a symbol of hope. One evening, as the villagers gathered to celebrate the harvest, the chief once again stood before them, his voice ringing out over the jubilant crowd. Ada has shown us what it means to listen to the land, to trust in each other, and to believe in the impossible, he said. Her wisdom has saved us, and her spirit has inspired us. From this day forward, let her story be told not just in our village but far beyond, so that others may learn from her courage and her brilliance. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing into the night. Ada, standing at the edge of the square, watched the celebration with a quiet smile. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, more lessons to learn, and more work to do. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of peace, her heart full of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. And as the stars twinkled above the village of Ibyub, their light seemed to whisper a simple truth: sometimes, the ones we overlook have the greatest gifts to offer. Ada, the girl who had once been dismissed as lazy, had shown them all what it truly meant to dream, and to act. The story of Ada's transformation spread far beyond the boundaries of Ibyub. Word of the girl who had turned her village's despair into triumph reached neighboring communities, traveling through traders, storytellers, and travelers who carried the tale with them wherever they went. Soon, delegations from other villages began to visit Ibyub, curious to see the irrigation system and learn the methods that had saved the village from the relentless drought. At first, Ada was overwhelmed by the attention. She had never sought fame or recognition, her only goal had been to help her people. But as she saw the eager faces of those who came to learn, she realized that her knowledge could make a difference not just in Ibyub but across the land. If the lessons she had learned could prevent even one village from suffering as hers had, then it was her responsibility to share them. So Ada began to teach. She held workshops in the village square, demonstrating how to build irrigation systems, enrich the soil, and select crops suited to the harsh climate. She spoke not just of techniques but of the mindset needed to overcome challenges, the importance of observing nature, listening to the land, and working together as a community. The visitors who came to Ibyub returned to their own villages inspired, carrying Ada's teachings with them. Slowly, a network of communities began to form, united by a shared commitment to resilience and innovation. Farmers exchanged ideas, elders shared stories of old practices, and young people took up the mantle of leadership, their minds open to new possibilities. But not everyone welcomed the change. Among the visitors to Abyub were those who saw Ada's influence as a threat to the old ways. Some accused her of arrogance, claiming that her methods disrespected tradition. Others, driven by jealousy, sought to discredit her, spreading rumors that her success was due to luck or outside help. One day, a powerful chief from a distant village arrived in Abyub, accompanied by a retinue of warriors and advisors. He was a proud man, known for his wealth and his strict adherence to tradition. When he heard of Ada's achievements, he dismissed them as the work of a naive girl who had gotten lucky. "I have come to see this so-called miracle worker," the chief announced as he entered the village square, his voice loud and commanding. "Let her prove to me that her ways are better than those of our ancestors." The villagers, who had gathered to greet the visitors, fell silent, their eyes turning to Ada. She stepped forward calmly, her expression composed but her heart pounding. She knew this was not just a test of her abilities but of everything she stood for. "What would you have me prove, great chief?" she asked respectfully, her voice steady. The chief gestured to a bag carried by one of his warriors. Inside were seeds, which he poured onto the ground for all to see. "These are the seeds of the sacred kola tree," he said. "They are rare and difficult to grow, requiring the most fertile soil and the perfect conditions. If your methods are truly superior, you will make these seeds sprout and thrive within 1 moon's time." The crowd murmured in surprise. The kola tree was a symbol of prosperity and unity, and its seeds were notoriously finicky. Many in the crowd doubted that Ada could succeed, but she did not waver. "I accept your challenge," she said, her voice clear. "But I ask for one condition: if I succeed, you must promise to share what you learn here with your people, so that they too may benefit from the knowledge we have gained." The chief hesitated, his pride battling with his curiosity. Finally, he nodded. "Very well," he said. "But if you fail, your methods will be dismissed as folly, and I will make sure the world knows it." Over the next moon, Ada threw herself into the challenge with unwavering determination. She studied the seeds carefully, observing their size, texture, and color. She consulted the elders, who shared stories of how the kola tree had been cultivated in the past. She tested the soil, enriched it with compost, and devised a system to protect the seeds from the scorching sun while ensuring they received enough water. As the days passed, the villagers watched with bated breath, their faith in Ada mingled with anxiety. The chief and his retinue remained in Abyub, observing her work with a mix of skepticism and begrudging respect. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. The villagers gathered in the square, their eyes fixed on the small plot of land where Ada had planted the seeds. As the chief stepped forward to inspect the site, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. There, emerging from the soil, were young kola saplings, their leaves vibrant and green. The chief knelt to examine them closely, his expression one of disbelief. He touched the leaves, felt the soil, and even tasted the water from the irrigation system. This is impossible," he murmured, shaking his head. "It is not impossible," Ada said gently. "It is the result of listening to the land, respecting its needs, and working with nature rather than against it. The kola tree is not just a symbol of unity, it is a lesson in patience, resilience, and the power of growth." The chief rose slowly, his eyes meeting Ada's. For the first time, his proud demeanor softened, replaced by a deep, genuine respect. "You have taught me a great lesson today," he said, his voice humble. "I will honor my promise and share what I have learned here with my people. And I will speak of you not as a mere girl but as a teacher and a leader." The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing through the hills. Ada smiled, her heart filled with gratitude and hope. She had not only met the challenge but had turned it into an opportunity to spread her message even further. From that day forward, Ada's name became synonymous with wisdom and courage. Her story was told in villages far and wide, inspiring countless others to embrace change and face adversity with determination. And as the network of communities grew, bound together by shared knowledge and mutual support, the land began to heal, its people thriving despite the challenges they faced. Ada remained in Abuab, continuing her work with quiet determination. She never sought titles or accolades, content to see her village prosper and her people united. But in the hearts of those she had touched, she would always be remembered as the girl who had turned her greatest challenge into a legacy of hope and renewal. As time passed, Ada's impact continued to ripple outward, weaving a story that transcended borders and generations. Her methods became a model of innovation and resilience, transforming not just Abuab but an entire region. The villages that adopted her techniques experienced a rebirth, turning barren lands into lush fields. However, with great success came new challenges, and Ada soon found herself at the crossroads of tradition and progress once again. The chief from the distant village, now an ally, returned to Abuab one fateful day with troubling news. His people had embraced Ada's teachings, but the region was facing a new threat. Raiders from the arid north, desperate for resources, had begun to target the fertile villages that were flourishing under her methods. The chief urged Ada to help prepare the people for the dangers ahead. Ada, now recognized as a leader not only in Abuab but across the region, understood the gravity of the situation. The raiders sought not just food and water but dominance, and their attacks were as much a test of unity as of strength. She gathered the elders, the youth, and representatives from the neighboring villages to address the looming crisis. "We cannot allow fear to divide us," Ada said, her voice steady but resolute. "What we have built together is stronger than any threat. The land has taught us how to survive, now we must teach each other how to protect it." Her words sparked a flurry of activity. The villages formed a coalition, pooling resources and knowledge to fortify their communities. Ada worked tirelessly, designing systems not only for agriculture but for defense. She proposed planting thorny hedges around the most vulnerable areas, creating natural barriers that would slow down any invaders. She also encouraged the construction of watchtowers made from bamboo and stone, allowing villages to communicate and warn each other of approaching danger using drums and fire signals. Despite the urgency, Ada's focus remained on solutions that reflected her core values. She emphasized the importance of cooperation and sought peaceful resolutions wherever possible. She organized emissaries to travel north and negotiate with the raiders, offering them knowledge of sustainable farming techniques in exchange for peace. While many were skeptical of this approach, Ada believed that teaching others to thrive on their own land was the most sustainable way to ensure long-term security. One of the most poignant moments during this time occurred when a group of women from the north arrived in Abuab. They had heard of Ada's work and had come seeking help for their own drought-stricken villages. Their stories of hardship mirrored what Abuab had once endured, and Ada's heart ached for them. "These are not our enemies," Ada told the gathered villagers after hearing the women's pleas. "They are people, just like us, struggling to survive. If we can extend a hand of friendship instead of a fist of war, we may find allies where we least expect them." Her words swayed the village, and Ada personally taught the northern women the techniques that had saved Abuab. She sent them back with seeds, tools, and knowledge, hoping they would carry not only survival but a message of peace to their people. But the raiders were not easily swayed. Weeks later, a band of them launched a surprise attack on one of the coalition villages. Thanks to the defensive measures Ada had implemented, the villagers were able to repel the attackers with minimal losses. The watchtower signals worked perfectly, summoning reinforcements from neighboring villages who arrived in time to drive the raiders back. The victory was a turning point. The raiders, realizing that the united villages were far stronger than they had anticipated, began to retreat. At the same time, stories of Ada's generosity and the knowledge she had shared with the northern women began to spread. Gradually, the raids ceased, replaced by cautious but hopeful exchanges of goods and ideas. Ada's vision of unity and mutual respect was coming to fruition, but the journey had taken its toll on her. The endless responsibilities, the weight of leadership, and the constant challenges had left her physically and emotionally exhausted. She longed for the quiet days of her youth, when she could lose herself in the simple joys of observation and discovery. One evening, as the village celebrated another bountiful harvest, Ada slipped away from the festivities and walked to the edge of the fields. The stars were bright, their light reflecting off the now thriving irrigation canals. She sat beneath a tree, her heart heavy with both pride and longing. As she sat in silence, the chief approached her. Though older now, his presence was as commanding as ever, tempered by the wisdom and humility he had gained through their years of partnership. "You've given so much to all of us, Ada," he said, sitting beside her. "But I see the weariness in your eyes. You must also give to yourself." Ada smiled faintly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I don't regret any of it," she said softly. "But sometimes, I wonder if there's more to life than always fighting to survive." The chief nodded thoughtfully. "There is," he said. "There's living, truly living. You've taught us how to thrive, but perhaps it's time for you to find what makes your own heart flourish." His words stayed with Ada long after the celebration ended. Over the next few months, she began to delegate more responsibilities to the younger leaders she had mentored, trusting them to carry forward the work she had begun. She spent more time exploring the forests and hills around Abyub, reconnecting with the curiosity and wonder that had driven her as a child. One day, she came across a secluded valley, its beauty untouched by human hands. A clear stream flowed through it, surrounded by vibrant flowers and towering trees. Ada felt an immediate connection to the place, as if it had been waiting for her all along. She decided to make it her sanctuary, a space where she could dream, create, and simply be. From her new home in the valley, Ada continued to inspire others, welcoming visitors who sought her guidance but maintaining the solitude she needed to recharge her spirit. The coalition of villages thrived, united by the lessons she had taught them, and her legacy grew with each passing year. Ada's story became a legend, told and retold across the land. To some, she was the girl who had saved her village; to others, she was a visionary who had changed the fate of an entire region. But to those who knew her best, she was simply Ada, the quiet observer who had listened to the land, trusted her instincts, and shown the world the power of compassion, resilience, and imagination.